So essentially, market access is about making sure that a patient gets access to a drug or medical device at the right time, right price,
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, I guess there's different systems around the world and different kind of questions or ways in which a medical technology, health technology can get to patients. I think in a lot of countries, New Zealand's a good example where we have what we would kind of call a universal healthcare system, where the government is really responsible for investing in health services, and that includes devices and medicines, in order to sort of heavily subsidise those or to make those almost free of charge for patients. And so that's kind of when we talk about market access in a country like New Zealand, that's really what that means. It's about making an investment case to the payer, so the government. And in New Zealand's case, that's predominantly Pharmac for medicines, it's Te Whatu Ora or the hospitals DHBs for other health technologies often. But it's about kind of going along and presenting a body of evidence that shows that against what is current standard of care, this new intervention delivers some level of benefit. And that then from those benefits, we sort of go through a process that very clearly articulated around putting a value to that benefit, and then out of that falls often, what is the appropriate kind of price level for that intervention, and then you have a bit of a discussion around, well, is that good value for money against other potential investments that you can make? Is the budget impact of that investment affordable? And then, though, if those two questions are yes, then we're happy days, we're away.
Yeah, so there's kind of two steps, right? Because there's the registration of the drug or medical device, and then there's the actual, like you mentioned, the approval to fund it. Just because something is registered doesn't mean automatically a patient gets access to it, particularly in a universal healthcare system. Maybe if it's registered and it's commercially available via the sponsor and you've got deep pockets in many cases, that's fine, or you've got health insurance, that's fine. But often there's a bit of a delay between registration and then actually the funding side of things in the case of universal healthcare systems like New Zealand and elsewhere.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, once a regulator has approved a technology or a medicine, it's available in the country and can be purchased privately. Often that is inaccessible to most people, particularly for conditions that either are rarer or have higher cost therapies associated with them. So cancer, I guess, is a good example of that, where the treatment costs are prohibitively high for most people. And so really it's about making those investment decisions as a government to make those treatments available to the widest possible proportion of people.
Right. And what's the process like in New Zealand? I mean, we talked in broad strokes with Abbas in the first episode of like the general types of health technology assessment mechanisms that you have. So like cost minimization, cost utility, cost benefit. There's another one in there that is eluding me.
There's lots of different types.
But those are the four kind of main big categories. But how does it, strictly speaking, in New Zealand, what's the standard approach that you would take? You kind of do a business case and you present it to Pharmac or whatever the other payer might be, Te Whatu Ora. And I imagine there's a lot of discussion that goes on back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So in New Zealand, the role of evaluator and payer is played by Pharmac for medicines and for a range of different agencies depending on what the health technology is for other things. I mean, my experience mainly is in medicines, and so we can probably talk about Pharmac as probably an example of that. But essentially, the beginning of the process is that the sponsor or the company collate all of the evidence that they have to show that there is a particular clinical benefit or a patient-relevant benefit to this particular intervention. And ideally, you would be able to compare directly that new intervention with the relevant standard of care in New Zealand. And so that's not always the easiest or always the case that you would have a direct head-to-head clinical trial in that with that particular comparison. But there are ways to get around that if you don't. You can make indirect comparisons via common comparators and things like that. So there's more technical aspects of how you would go about that. But really, that's the kind of the basis for an application, and it sort of follows an acronym that is sort of common in our space called PICO, which is basically describing who the population is that's going to receive the intervention, so the patient group, what the intervention is. So you sort of go through a bit of a discussion on the mechanism of action, the biological plausibility for why you would expect the results that you see in the clinical trial. The comparator, so what are you going to be substituting or replacing in clinical practice, and then the outcomes. So what are the clinical benefits that your patient benefits that your intervention is going to deliver, and are those important? Are they meaningful for the patient or for the healthcare system? And you sort of go through a process of developing all of that and synthesizing that into a kind of a not always concise dossier that describes as well as you can from the evidence that you have, a sort of a summary of why you would want to invest in this particular intervention. I guess that's what you're trying to get to, really.
Yeah, so it really does cross the boundary between science, economics, medical writing, business case, a bit of marketing, all into one.
Absolutely.
So you're jack of all trades.
Yeah, well, you sort of, you just sort of have to be. And to be fair, like, we're not. I'm not an island in my company. Like, so we work across the different disciplines. So I'm not just kind of left alone in a dark room just to develop these sort of things. Like it really is a team effort, and so it does draw. But you're actually right. It draws on every aspect of certainly of a commercial operation like ours to describe all of those different pieces in sort of a concise way.